of our former jurors who had been dismissed for misconduct for communicating and writing notes to other jurors had indeed communicated with one of the sitting jurors. The court had to conduct an inquiry as to whether or not such communications were received and what the content was, and the court conducted an individual interview of each one of our jurors, and we will proceed. Anything else, counsel?
Yes, sir. We'd like to put something on the record. We might, perhaps, the clerk may want to put attention.
What's the topic, counsel?
With regard to the jury, the request.
A request?
Request, yes.
All right. Madam Porter? Yes. All right, counsel, anything else? Ms. Clark, Mr. Carkin, have you all had the opportunity to consult regarding stipulations regarding the people's final witness?
I have a proposed copy with me, and I'd like to give it to Mr. Cochran and let him look at that.
All right, let's have the jurors, please. Deputy McNair. All right, good morning again, Mr. Diedrich.
Good morning.
Sir, you were reminded that you were still under oath, and Mr. Bailey, you may continue with your cross-examination.
have a
learned treatise here, which I'm handing Ms. Clark. May I hand the witness a copy on that?
Yes.
Future question.
And what is this, Mr. Bailey?
It is an article from the Journal of Forensic Sciences, if it pleases the court, may be marked Defense Next in Order, published in '89 by certain people dealing with a topic raised by the witness, I believe, in his direct, called thin layer chromatography.
1223.
Both the people and the witness need an opportunity to read this.
I intended to let them have that. I'm not going into it right now. That's why I gave it to them now.
All right. Proceed.
All right. Thank you. Mr. Diedrich, since we parted company yesterday, has a revised typed edition of the notes that we've been working with, your notes, been returned to you with some corrections made?
They have, yes, sir.
Have you reviewed that?
Well, I haven't had a chance to look through it thoroughly, but it looks pretty much in order.
Okay. In the event, can you tell us a little bit about the methodology that you used in keeping notes in your cases? Do you have any set procedure, things that you regularly do when it comes to creating these notes?
Well, the first set of notes generally refers to the examination of the original item, how it was received, the condition of the item, perhaps any markings that may be on the container, if it was sealed, if it was opened or damaged. From this, the item is then opened and notes are taken of the condition of the inside contents. Again, any markings, the container, the type of container, and so forth. Once the material has been removed from an item, in this particular case, most of the material was debris packets. So once that material has been mounted on a glass microscope slide, the analysis and the notes essentially are describing the question material first, and then taking a look at the known characteristics, the known hair samples or the known fiber samples, and then doing a comparison. The notes regarding hairs would generally be short notes as to type, race, body area, whether they're suitable for comparison, maybe the approximate length and color. With fibers, first off, with most fiber examinations, the fibers are not explained routinely, simply because there's no way to know what significance a number of fibers may have that's found on a particular item. You look at the fibers and form some mental notes, and then later compare those with the actual fabrics in question, maybe that are worn by the suspect in a case or by the victim. And the comparisons are then made, and the tests are conducted, and the notes are taken based on the test.
Okay. Are there any dates on any of the notes that you produced in this case as to indicating when you performed certain tasks or made certain observations?
No, they are not.
When you got your biology degree at Indiana, did you take a course in chemistry?
I did, yes.
Was the importance of sequencing observations stressed in your chemistry course?
Well, I'm sure it was. That's a long time ago.
Mm-hmm. You know, by the way, most lawyers are pre-med students that couldn't pass chemistry, don't you?
Perhaps for hair examiners, too.
In any event, it is not your practice, I take it, to make any dates on the notes.
It's not routine, no, to make date notations.
Is it your practice to keep a sequence within the notes that accurately reflects the sequence in which you performed your duties?
Generally, the note-taking as far as the number of the item, they generally follow a sequence, although there may be items that are placed in different locations depending on when the exams may have been conducted.
All right. Are the examiners in your section given codes to identify their notes with?
Well, all examiners have symbols, lab symbols, instead of initials. Mine are UJ. It's just a kind of a alphabetical sequencing that we have, just so we don't confuse initials.
Who is QJ?
QJ is Bill Bodziak.
And he is someone you worked with on this case?
Yes.
And the number that appears at the top of the notes, is that a case number, discrete case number?
Right, that would refer to the year, month, day, and the case number that was sequenced in the Evidence Control Center.
Do you remember, Mr. Diedrich, on June 25th and 27th of 1985, that the FBI at its Quantico facility hosted an international symposium in hair and fiber specialists?
Right, I remember that.
Do you remember that a committee was appointed in order to attempt to define some standards that would be recognized within the profession?
Right, I sat in on one of the panels.
Were you a member of the committee that defined standards?
No, I just was on one of the panels that was discussing the Atlas of Hair Characteristics.
Okay. You recall that the Standards Committee recommended using a checklist such as the one that we reviewed yesterday?
They may have, yes.
I take it that is something with which you had disagreed sometime before that symposium was ever held.
No, I don't necessarily disagree with the use of a checklist. I don't use it, but I don't think there's anything wrong with the checklist if it helps you conduct your examinations better.
Yesterday, by the way, you indicated no great degree of familiarity with the laboratory, the RCMP, which yielded this proposed two-part checklist that we looked at. Is that an accurate reflection of your testimony?
Well, I've never been there. I've only spoken to Mr. Gaudet, and if they use the checklist, I guess you've furnished that to me.
Isn't it true that in the past you have expressed some admiration for the operations of the RCMP in hair and fibers under oath?
Well, yes. In the papers that I've read, the one by Barry Gaudet, I don't agree with everything in the paper, but the idea that he's saying is that hair examinations are significant, hair associations are significant. I agree with that. I think that that's the right idea.
Okay. Now, the first part of your notes merely reflects the receipt of certain materials and the assignment to these materials of Q numbers,
That's right.
meaning that at this stage of the game they are questioned.
Right. All those would be question items.
Right. And do you use the word question or questioned, just out of curiosity? We see it both ways in transcripts.
Oh,
Which term is used in your laboratory?
well, I don't know if it matters. I mean,
Okay.
I've seen it both ways.
All right, fine. But known always means that you have some positive way of identifying the source of anything marked with a K.
Right, that's correct.
After you have inventoried the things that have been sent into you by whatever agency you are helping, you then go to examination of questioned items, correct?
That's correct.
Right. I don't believe in your direct examination you mentioned that you examined a number of items that were retrieved from Chicago.
I don't believe I did, no.
Would you look at page 5 of your notes and tell the jury just a little bit about what it was that was submitted to you and what you found with respect to materials from Chicago?
Sustain.
May we approach?
Not at this point.
May I make it my witness on this point?
Not at this point.
All right. In that event, Mr. Diedrich, would you point to the first area in your notes where you begin to examine things rather than just to describe and label them?
All right, I'm there.
What page is that?
That would be page 7.
Okay. Page 7 of, I believe, 16, correct?
Yeah, I don't know what the total number of note pages are, but
Look at the last page on the top and see if you see the number 16.
that's correct.
Okay. All right. Is this typical of the manner in which you go about examining questioned items?
That's typical.
Do you always examine the questioned items before exposing yourself to the characteristics of the known items that you seek to compare later on?
Generally, yes.
What is the reason for doing things in that order?
Well, the one reason is not to open up the knowns in the same area, at least have them exposed on the surface of the counter where you're going to be looking at the question material. Sometimes it's useful, though, to look at the knowns just to get an idea of the color, the length, the curl, to get an idea what you might be looking for in question items of evidence if you have a large quantity of evidence to look through. I do it just to familiarize myself with what type of person or surface this fabric may have had contact with, just to study it.
If you were to look at the knowns in a given case and find that all three relevant people were blondes, it would save you a lot of time looking at brunette and Asian and other hairs, correct?
Right, and again, you may have racial differences between a suspect and a victim, and you may be looking at first for a particular racial group.
All right. Now, there are a great number of fibers and other miscellaneous materials described in your notes from your inspection in the microscope which have not been talked about in your testimony. Is that a fair statement?
That's fair.
Okay. When you examine hair characteristics, do you note those aspects of the hair you're looking at that seem significant?
In the known characterization, yes.
I'm talking about question now. When you're looking at a questioned hair through the microscope before you get to the comparison microscope, this is a two-stage process, is it not?
Right.
You first identify what it is that the naked eye might not be able to tell with one microscope, and then when you get to the knowns, you put them together as we saw yesterday in your sketch, correct?
That's right.
So on page 8, for instance, where we're looking at you examining hairs, at the top, for instance, dark brown, too dark brown, Caucasian origin head hair fragments. Is that what COHH means?
That's right.
Okay. Do you normally, as you make this observation, this threshold observation, see any of the characteristics which will become important in testing similarity later on? Is this microscope powerful enough for you to see the medulla, cortex?
Yeah, sure. You may use a range of magnifications from low magnification up through 250 magnification, or maybe higher, but at this point it's mainly just a scan and taking a look at what you have and not necessarily pinpointing specific microscopic characteristics.
The pinpointing will be done in the comparison stage later on if you get to that as to a particular hair, right?
Right. If the hair is suitable for comparison, and once the comparison process starts, you take a real close look at the microscopic characteristics at that point.
And you repeatedly use in your observations an acronym NSF-SCP, which means not suitable for significant comparison purposes, correct?
Right.
All right. And that simply means you have to discard that item when it comes to future procedures.
Right.
It
Generally,
does not
that's
have potential value.
right. That generally those aren't compared.
Okay. Is it fair to say, as you look over your notes on hair comparisons on pages 8 and 9, that there are very few characteristics described individually?
There are very few. That's right.
You may say that a hair is club and negroid, but you don't make a practice of noting the medulla, the ovoid bodies,
Right.
the pigments, the cuticle, the length, etc.
That's-
I take that back. The length you normally note, do you not?
Right. I generally note how long the hair was.
Okay. And is that because you retain in your memory what it is that you're seeing, even though you don't write it down?
Well, you do retain a little bit, but you don't always retain all the characteristics. That's why you need to look at the hairs with a comparison microscope.
But if I were to ask you as to any of these individual hairs, the appearance of the ovoid bodies and the pigments and the cortex and so forth, I take it you might have some difficulty calling those to mind.
Well, yes, I wouldn't recall specifically which hairs, although I have On some of the hairs, I have a pretty vivid memory, but others I don't.
Okay. Now, would you turn to page 16 of your notes?
Okay.
Do I take it from the fact that this is the last page of your notes that this is the last operation you performed in working up this case?
Well, it would have been, right, it would have been at a stage before the comparison process took place.
Are the comparisons described earlier in the notes?
Well, they would have been, yes.
Well, you use the word similar in some cases, do you not?
Right, right.
You use the word like, correct?
That's right.
You use the word unlike.
I did.
You do not at any time in your notes use the word same, do you, Mr. Dietrich?
I don't believe I did.
No. Now, as to the known hairs, first of all, K7 is a whole series of hairs that were submitted as coming from the head of Mr. Simpson, correct?
Right, that's correct.
You never received any limb hairs or pubic hairs from Mr. Simpson, did you?
No, I did not.
Okay. But you did as to both victims.
Yes,
You have 3 types of hair for Mr. Goldman, 3 for Mrs. Simpson, and just the head hair for Mr. Simpson, is that correct?
right, I had,
Pardon me?
Roll. Roll. Proceed.
okay, I received a head hair sample from each person. I also received eye hairs from and limb hairs from both victims, but I only received a head hair sample from the defendant.
Okay. Now, without going through all of the notes, is it fair to say that your description as you examine the known hairs, starting with K7, Mr. Simpson, is rather detailed?
Well, it's somewhat detailed, yes.
Well, you cover quite a few of the characteristics that were showing up on our various lists yesterday, do you not?
They appear to be similar words, yes.
And as to K4, Nicole Simpson, you, in similar fashion, are rather detailed in describing the various characteristics that you seem to find significant as you examine these hairs under the microscope.
That's correct.
This is not a comparison microscope at this stage. It is still the 50 to 100 power, is it?
Oh, no, no. The comparison microscope is, as I said, 2 microscopes that are connected optically, and you can shut off one microscope. So essentially, the examinations are being conducted up to 400 magnification. It's the regular research microscope. When you do the comparisons, you essentially turn on the other one so you can see both microscopes. So it's a regular research compound microscope.
All right. And with a combination of mirrors, I suppose, you appear to fit the images together even though they don't actually join physically in that fashion.
Right. If you go to the comparison phase, you would just essentially redirect the light through prisms for both microscopes.
Okay. And as to Mr. Goldman, the K1 series of hairs that were taken from his head, you, in like fashion, have quite a bit of detail describing what that hair looks like, do you not?
I do, yes.
But when we go back through your notes and find that you are noting something is like or similar to one of the K hairs, none of that kind of detail is generally present. Is that a fair statement?
No, that's correct.
Okay. Now, Mr. Diedrich, is it not fair to say that the integrity of the work that you do in cases of this sort is in many ways limited by the integrity of what has been done prior to the time you received the samples?
Yes.
For instance, if someone were to mix up different kinds of hairs so that you were informed that a hair came from one place, when in fact it came from another, that would interfere substantially with the conclusions that you're able to draw as to probable source, would it not?
Well, I think the comparison would still be valid and the associations or exclusions would be valid, but the significance of the finding would be questionable.
Exactly. In other
Right.
words, you have to know whether or not a fiber or hair that you find to be significant actually came from where it says in the papers that it came from.
Right. We're at the mercy of those that collect and send the evidence to us.
Exactly. Did you ever go to this crime scene?
I did not.
Do you normally go to crime scenes when you're involved in a case of this sort?
No. I have in the past, but it's not very often.
Do you ever give instruction to local police agencies that seek your services as to what they should do with the crime scene or how they should handle the evidence?
I have through either lecture or conversation given advice on how crime scenes should be conducted.
Did you play any such role in this case?
No. I came in after the fact.
Okay. When was the first time that you came to Los Angeles in connection with the Simpson matter?
That would have been, well, it was August 23rd, I believe. I was here.
Okay, and for what purpose, if you can tell me?
Well, I had a trial in federal court, and I stopped over at the crime lab and also with the DA's office.
So this was more incidental than purposeful, I take it?
Right. It killed two birds with one stone, essentially.
Okay. And did you at that time attempt to interview any of the people who were involved in the collection process?
I did speak with Detective Van Adder. I did speak with Susan Brockbank. I spoke with Colin Yamuchi, and that's about all the individuals I spoke with, I believe.
Without going into what was said, did you quiz them about what they had done individually at the crime scene that might have some significance to the work you expected to do?
No, not so much at the crime scene. I was interested to know something about packaging, processing techniques, how they do processing in the crime lab. I was interested to know about cut marks that I saw on the gloves. I did take a look at the glove at that point. I saw some cut marks, and I asked some questions about that.
Did you ever observe that one of the gloves appeared to be worn? The leather being worn. Did you notice that at any time?
Worn. Both gloves appeared to be, well, to have been worn and also affected by body fluids, stained and misshaped.
You saw on the gloves what appeared to be dried blood. Is that?
It looked like little pools of dried blood in the crevices of the glove. Yes.
Did you ever ask to see any of the photographs depicting, or videotapes depicting, the handling and removal of the body?
Well, no. I may have seen something like that on television, but I've never seen any actual footage as a viewing.
Well, even if it was on television, do you recall seeing Mr. Goldman's body removed from the scene and placed on a gurney?
I do recall that, but not specifically as to what he may have had contact with, but I do recall the body being removed.
And did you see that it was actually sort of dragged across the ground for a little way as it was coming out of the dirt area?
No, I wasn't really paying too much attention at that point.
I want you to look at the photo that is in evidence. What's the number? E56, and just ask you if you have seen it before.
I've got to cut off this copy.
You haven't been to the crime scene, Mr. Diedrich, but you were able to recognize earlier the hat and gloves for the benefit of the court and jury. Was that done because you had seen photos even though you hadn't seen the actual items?
Right, I saw some photographs.
Is this a photo that you have seen before with the number 100 in the background?
I don't think I've ever seen that photograph.
If the body of Mr. Goldman were dragged over the soil and there were hairs in the soil similar to that of Mr. Simpson, might there not have been a transference there of the
Sure.
one hair that you found?
Sure.
You have no way of knowing from what part of the shirt that hair came, is that correct?
That's right.
And it was almost too short to use for comparison, was it not?
Was extremely small,
Yeah.
yes.
Next question. You were asked on direct examination about the two gloves. You testified that the Bundy glove had a coarse hair compatible with the Akita Kato on the surface of the glove, correct?
I believe I testified to that effect, yes.
You testified that the Rockingham glove had fur hairs consistent with the belly of that animal on it when you examined it, correct?
Well, it could have been from the belly or from the under fur off the back. I don't even know if I know where the known samples came from, but could have been from either source.
But you prepared a chart
Right.
purporting to show that the Rockingham glove had fur-type hairs on it,
Right. It had fur hairs.
and that you have previously described those as being common to the underpart of a dog as opposed to the tougher coat.
Okay. And maybe just a matter of semantics here. When I say the under fur, essentially under the outer coat, which could be on the belly and it could be on the back, but it's just the soft, fine hairs that are closer to the body.
If that dog used this shaded place to sleep or lie down on a regular basis when it was at the Bundy residence, might you expect some fur hairs to be left behind in the soil?
I would expect that, yes.
And if the Rockingham glove deposited at any time on that soil, might that not explain the presence of those hairs?
It could, yes.
Okay, thank you. You showed us, I believe, at the outset of your testimony when you were educating the jury as to the science of hair and fibers, the analogy to a pencil. Is that an analogy that you used when you were a young examiner?
That's right. That's in the formative years of hair testimony, the pencil is often used.
But by the 6th or 7th year of your career, had you not discarded it as not very useful?
Well, it's always useful. Some people maybe can picture a hair structure a little better by a pencil than maybe a drawing because it's three-dimensional. But some examiners still use it, and I think I did here.
Okay. You testify in Alaska in 1988 against a gentleman named Anthony.
Yeah, that's correct, I did.
What's counsel referring to?
It's foundational at this point. I don't know that we're going to use anything. But I assume we're leading to that.
What's that?
I assume we're leading to a transcript.
I intend to ask him whether he said certain things, certainly.
All right, counsel's entitled to see that.
All right. Well, I was unaware that one had to.
Let me see the sidebar with the
All
clerk,
right.
please. All right, thank you, counsel. Proceed.
You recall testifying in that case, do you know?
I do, yes.
Do you remember whether or not, during your testimony, you described the RCMP lab in Canada as having a pretty good setup, as well as a home office, central research establishment, and the med lab in England? Do you recall that reference?
I believe they probably do have good setups, although I haven't seen any of them. In terms of the data that they put out, the results, the studies that they conduct.
What is the med lab in England, incidentally?
The med lab, it's in London. Actually, the med lab, it's actually changed since then. The med lab and the home office central research establishment, which handles all the labs in England, they're merging right now. But they're two separate entities. It's like the med lab in Toronto and the RCMP in Canada. Two separate systems.
Okay. Do you remember saying with reference to the pencil, when we first get in training and start testifying, it's kind of a nice prop, but I don't use it anymore?
Objection.
Sustained.
Counsel, what transcript people have never seen.
Sustained. Foundational objection.
All right.
It's
You-
called foundation, and we stand when we make those objections. Proceed. The objection is sustained.
Did you say in that case, if you can recall, that you don't use that analogy anymore in 1988?
Sustained.
All right. Mr. Diederich, you have testified in quite a number of cases, have you not? 400, I believe you've said.
I have, yes.
And in each of those cases, you have been disposed to acquaint the court and jury with your estimation of your experience in the field of hair and fibers.
I try to do that, yes.
That generally involves some description of the number of cases that you've had
Generally does, yes.
and the number of places that you've testified, courts, state, federal, territorial, things like that,
That's right.
and other information about your experience.
That's correct.
Okay. Is it fair to say that by 1984 you had been an examiner after your one-year period for 6 years?
Approximately 6 years, right?
And were you then receiving about 30 cases a month for your own handling? I think that's the figure you gave us yesterday.
Right. Well, I don't recall exactly how many I've gotten over the years. I'd have to go back and take an average, but 30 cases would be probably about right.
Well, you've told this jury in this case that you have examined 4,000 cases in round numbers and testified 400 times. Is that correct?
Overruled.
Wasn't that your statement on direct examination?
Right. In this particular case, yes.
All right. Now, are you a careful person when you give testimony, Mr. Diederich?
Sure, I try to be.
You know that it may be of importance in evaluating your testimony for the jury to have accurate representations as to your experience.
I try to be as accurate as possible.
And you have been working steadily for the 17 years that you've been an examiner.
I have.
Did you testify in 1987 that you had already handled 4,000 cases?
I don't recall. I may have. I don't know. I don't recall what you're referring to.
Okay. Did you testify in 1990 that you had handled 4,000 cases in New York?
I kind of got stuck on the 4,000. I actually stopped counting cases after a while. I used to keep records on all the cases that I worked, all the testimonies that I had, and I've stopped counting. So it may be more than that.
Did you testify in 1991 that you'd handled 4,000 cases?
Like I said, I kind of stopped at 4,000.
And did you testify in 1993 that you'd handled 4,000 cases?
Probably so, sure.
Now, Diederich, in an effort to find out how thoroughly you examine each of these cases as such, and I assume a case means the involvement of multiple materials, hairs, fibers, whatever.
Yes, it does.
Sometimes, I believe you said running into the hundreds.
Right, that's
Certainly
right.
true in this case.
That's right.
Okay. The amount of time available to you to spend on a case is of some significance as to whether you are seeing everything that you need to see, is it not?
Right, it's relative.
If you were forced to accept an overload because examiners got sick or whatever and work had to be done, it would minimize your opportunity to exercise care and be reflective.
No, I don't believe that it minimizes the attention you spend on a case. Obviously, you have to prioritize your operations, and the casework is pretty much the same. You give the case the same attention that you possibly can give it.
When you look through the microscope initially at an object, hair or fiber, do you just glance at it? Do you study it? How much time would you estimate that you need at a minimum to form the necessary impression of the object being scrutinized?
Well, it depends on the item. Some items are pretty quickly identified, and others may take a little while.
Okay. Do you have any estimate at all as to the average amount of time that you need in order to make a proper observation?
Well, observations are made very quickly, and as you're going through the material that's on a slide, so that multiple observations can be made within a minute. You could identify most of the material on that slide.
Okay. And what about the comparison microscope? If you get to that stage as to a certain question and known object, do you take a little more time there in order to study the matter?
Sure, it takes a little longer to do that.
Okay. How many different cases would you say that you could handle in an hour at your laboratory, average type cases?
In 1 hour?
Yeah.
Well, if the average case is somewhere between 10 and 20 items, each examiner has a technician who prepares material. 10 cases could be prepared and ready to work at one time. One could, depending on the size of the case, could work 2 cases, possibly 3 a day as far as the comparisons go, and depending on the size. Smaller cases you can turn around quickly.
Okay. And you have testified that you do this in a 5-hour day, generally.
Well,
That is from 7 to 12
right,
here at the microscope.
Right, at the microscope, that's correct.
Okay, well, that's all I'm interested in for purposes of this line of questioning.
Right.
All right. And as of 1987 in May, you had been an examiner for how long?
87 would be 9 years, I guess.
Okay. If you work 5 hours a day, 250 days a year, for 9 years, and examine 4,000 cases, do you have any idea at the rate at which you were going through those cases?
Well, I think we've already shown that your mathematics is better than mine, but,
You want to take a stab at it?
well, like I said, if you work about 300 to 400 cases a year, in that range, in 10 years, you're closing in over the 3,000 mark. And that's what it averaged there for a long time. I was really working a lot of cases. It slowed down during the past few years.
But it appears that you have increased not one whit since 1987, but still at 4,000. Is that true? You've done no cases since then?
Well, no, like I said, I kind of got to the point where I stopped counting, and I probably got stuck on this 4,000.
Okay.
I'm sure I've worked more cases than that.
Have you had a chance just to glance at the article I handed you? I don't intend to go into its text.
I did. I read it.
Are you familiar with the subject TLC, which does not mean tender loving care?
Yeah, I am, yes.
Okay. Is that a process that can be used to further define the likeness between suspect fibers?
Yes, it could be used.
Is it a process with which you are familiar?
I've used it in the past, yes.
And its technical name is thin layer chromatography, correct?
That's correct.
In essence, what are you doing when you apply that technique to a question fiber?
Well, it's a method by which you can extract or take out the coloring or the dye that's present in the fiber and then separate that dye on a plate or a gel plate, and the dyes or the components of the color that make up the fiber will separate, and you'll have bands of color.
Do you remember what you told us early in your direct examination about the amount of cotton fiber that is manufactured in the United States every year?
5 billion pounds.
Okay. Do you have any idea whatsoever of the number of fabrics of a blue-black nature that look black to the naked eye that were distributed in the Los Angeles area in the past 5 or 10 years?
I have no idea.
Did you apply thin-layer chromatography to the samples you derived in this case?
I did not.
Thank you, that's all.
Ms. Clark.
Excuse me. May we approach, Your Honor? We have before I finish the cross, we have a matter to bring up.
waiting for one juror.
Oh.
All right, Mr. Bailey. All right, we have all of our jurors present again.
Mr. Diedrich, I want to ask you, with respect to certain items that have been referred to in your testimony, whether these assertions are acceptable from your point of view. In other words, whether or not you find them to be true. First of all, as to hair found in the Bronco, would you agree that no hair consistent with Nicole Brown Simpson was found in the Bronco?
That's correct.
Would you also agree that no hair consistent with Ronald Goldman was found in the Bronco?
That's correct.
Okay. With respect to fiber in the Bronco, would you agree that no fiber consistent with either glove was found in the Bronco?
That's right.
Would you agree that no fiber consistent with Goldman's clothes was found in the Bronco?
That's correct.
As to both and that no fiber consistent with Nicole Brown Simpson's clothes was found in the Bronco?
That's correct.
With respect to both gloves, would you agree that no hair consistent with O.J. Simpson, as you have used that term consistent, was on the Bundy glove?
That's right.
And quite apart from the unidentified hairs, one limb, one fragment, I think, that you thought were from an African American, is it not also true that no hair consistent with O.J. Simpson was found on the Rockingham glove?
That's correct.
As to the socks that you examined, would you agree that no hair consistent with Ronald Goldman was found on the sock?
I would.
And that no hair consistent with Nicole Brown Simpson was found on the sock?
That's correct.
As to fiber, with respect to your examination of the sock, would you agree that there is on the sock no fiber consistent with either glove?
I would, yes.
No fiber consistent with Goldman's clothes,
That's right.
and no fiber consistent with Nicole Brown Simpson's clothes?
That's correct.
Would you also agree that the fact that 35 hairs with roots were found on Ronald Goldman's shirt area, I believe, was that where the bulk of them were located,
That's right.
strongly suggests to you that those hairs were pulled out by an attacker before he attacked Goldman, and that the directionality goes from Nicole Brown Simpson to Ronald Goldman?
It appears from that evidence, yes.
Would you also agree that you found in the hairs in the hat what appeared to be an indication of dandruff on the cuticle?
No, there was dandruff in the known hairs,
Yes,
right, in the known sample.
I'm sorry, in the known sample.
That's right.
Is it not true that you found no indication of dandruff in the knit hat,
That's right.
or in any of the hairs that you have said could have come from O.J. Simpson? in
That's
the knit
right.
hat?
That's correct.
You have said that fibers tend to come and go as they cling to clothing and then fall off and so forth.
Right.
What about hairs? Do they sometimes hang around for a long time once attached to a given object?
They may, depending on the garment and what happens to the garment.
Did you find some cat hairs in your examinations of the materials in this case?
I did.
Could you tell the court where you found them?
Give me a second, please.
Sure.
Collage as an exhibit, since it was exhibit to the jury.
On the next in order. Can we use the paper version?
Yes, we'll use a paper version. Mrs. Robertson? 1224.
Okay.
Mr. Bailey.
Okay, shall I just read them off as I find them?
Tell us what you found with respect to cat hairs.
Okay. Now, on Q4, which was the cap from the defendant's vehicle, there was a cat hair. Q4 was the cap that was found on the floorboard. There was also a cat hair that was recovered from Nicole Brown's dress, I recall. There were a number of cat hairs recovered from the tapings from Cowling's Bronco. There was a cat hair recovered from a Chicago item, which we haven't talked about.
How about the
There's a-
Q4 cap? Did you mention that?
Q4, well, it would have been the same cap, right, from the Bronco, and there's also cat hair on the shovel.
Okay, now, cat hairs, like other hairs, can stay in place for quite some period of time.
Right, they can.
Did you ever inquire of anyone as to whether or not either of the Simpsons had a cat, or the children? In other words, whether there was one around?
I believe it came up at one point. I don't recall the answer to that.
Did you learn that Nicole Brown Simpson had not had any cat for more than 5 months prior to the murder?
Sustained.
Okay. I'll ask you to assume that fact, and then ask you if it's unusual that there should be a cat hair on her dress in light of those circumstances.
Proper hypothetical since facts not in evidence.
Sustained.
All right? There is no way that you can tell, either at the time of your examination or today, how long that hair had been on that dress, true?
There's no way to know that, no.
There is no way that you can tell how long the K7 similar hairs inside and outside the Bundy cap had been there
No.
prior
there
to
isn't.
June 12th.
No, there's no way.
There is no way to tell how the non-K7, that is, unlike hairs and hair fragments of African-American origin found inside and outside the Bundy cap, some of which were treated. No way to tell how long they had been there, correct?
That's right.
And there is no way to tell, as to Diedrich, which came first, is there?
No, there's no way to know.
Ms. Clark.
Sir, have you ever examined the hair samples taken from inmates who have been incarcerated for a month or more?
I have.
And in examining those hair samples of inmates who've been incarcerated for a month or more, have you noticed anything about their hair condition as a result of the incarceration?
Well, it may change, and dandruff is one good example of that.
Could you explain, please?
Well, the hair characteristics, hairstyles, hair hygiene, a lot of things change, I would assume. I've never been in jail, but I would assume that conditions change to what you're normally accustomed to, and that might be one, that your shampoo changes and how you take care of yourself may change.
And so dandruff on the hair samples taken from inmates that have been incarcerated for a month or more, is that a common or uncommon thing for you to find?
Oh, that's not uncommon to see that.
And the fact that the hairs inside the knit cap found at Bundy, which you determined were consistent with those of the defendant, the fact that they did not have dandruff, did that cause you to rule the defendant out as the possible source for those hairs?
No, it's not one of the characteristics that's used for exclusion.
Why not?
Well, because it most often is maybe a temporary condition, and also it may not be present on the surface of the hair for very long. If a hair is deposited on a clothing item, contacts or whatever may dislodge it. It's not something that's attached. It just happens to be there.
Now, you just spoke of cat hairs. You said you saw some cat hairs on the items recovered from the Bundy scene?
Right, there was one cat hair that was recovered from Nicole Brown's dress.
And you said you saw also cat hairs in the shovel and on the floorboard from the defendant's Bronco?
Right, there were a couple hairs, that's correct, from inside the Bronco.
Did the cat hairs from inside the defendant's Bronco appear to originate from the same kind of cat that deposited the hair on Nicole Brown?
I didn't even attempt to make that comparison. I just made the identification.
That they were cat hair?
They were cat hairs.
So you can't even tell us if they look like they came from the same cat?
I couldn't. It could be 3 different cats for all I know at this point.
Yes, and did you make any determination in that regard with respect to the cat hairs in the Bronco owned by A.C. Cowling?
I didn't attempt to make a comparison. I had no actual known standards. There were more cat hairs from the tapings from A.C. Cowling's Bronco, which suggests to me that perhaps he had a cat, or more likely to have a cat.
And if a cat happened to walk through the Bundy crime scene shortly after the murders, might that cause hair from that cat to be deposited on either Nicole Brown or Ronald Goldman or anywhere at the scene?
Well, yeah, that's possible. I mean, we can stretch this, I guess.
Okay, let's. For example, if there was a cat that used to walk through the Bundy crime scene before it became a crime scene on previous occasions, might that cause its hair to be deposited on the walkway?
Yes, it might.
And then in falling on the walkway, might Nicole Brown's body or dress pick up that hair?
That's possible.
No way to tell.
There's no way to know. I only see the end result.
You spoke, sir, of yesterday on cross-examination concerning the appearance of crushed hairs when someone has suffered an injury to the head. You recall that?
I do.
In this particular case, sir, do you know whether the coroner submitted to you hair samples taken from the area of Nicole Brown's head that received injury in this case?
I do not. It did not appear to be a random sampling.
And when you say did not appear to be a random sampling, what do you mean by that?
Well, it appeared from the hairs that it was more like a clump of hairs, and they were all pulled.
From one location on the
It
head?
just appeared that way. It had a pretty narrow range of characteristics.
And is that the preferred method for taking a hair standard from someone?
No, the preferred method is a random sampling from different areas as well as combings.
And when you let me ask you about Ron Goldman's sample then, sir. Did that have an appearance like that of Nicole Brown's, that is a clump?
Well, it appeared to be a rather uniform sample, which suggests a clump as opposed to random sampling.
A clump taken from one area of the head instead of the preferred method of all areas of the head?
It appeared that way. It's not uncommon, from my experience, to get those types of samples in. It's not the preferred way.
And when you get that kind of a sample in, does that inhibit your ability to make the associations that you should be able to make if you had a good standard to questioned items?
Right. It may limit the comparison process. That is, some hairs which may have originated from the person may be thrown out. They may not be included as a possible source of that hair because they're a little bit outside the range of characteristics.
Because the range you got in your standard was too limited?
Right. I had a better range of characteristics, for instance, from Ron Goldman's shirt, from the hairs that were damaged that came off probably during the struggle, than I did in the actual known hair sample.
Did you see any naturally shed hairs on Ron Goldman's body?
Well, there
On
was
his shirt?
not on the shirt, no. On the pants. There
On
was
his jeans?
right. There was one hair on the pants.
And how did that hair look in comparison to the hairs that you saw that had been collected by the coroner, the hair standard?
Well, it was again very short, naturally shed, approximately 1 inch in length, and it was similar to the proximal portion of the known standard in a limited sense.
Was it similar to any other hairs that you examined in this case?
Well, it was similar to the hair that was found on the Rockingham glove.
That brown Caucasian hair you talked about earlier?
Right, that's correct.
Which was also naturally shed, correct?
Right, same length, naturally shed.
Now, you spoke a little, I think you mentioned on cross-examination that it was rare to see hairs on the head of a person, a homicide victim, that had a crushed appearance. You recall that?
I recall saying something like that, yes.
First of all, let me ask you this. If Nicole Brown had been struck on the head by the fist of her assailant, would that cause the appearance of her hairs, if hairs were taken from that area and submitted to you, would it cause their appearance to be crushed when you examine them under the microscope?
No. That
Why
would
not?
Well, hairs are very resilient and they're also very small. The injuries that one would sustain would be more to the underlying tissues, like the scalp as opposed to the hair. The hair would just bounce back. You couldn't see that microscopically. You can actually hammer a hair sometimes, depending on the surface, the hardness of the surface, and not even see any evidence of that.
Well, what about if the murderer took Nicole Brown and shoved her against the wall, causing her head to be hit against the wall, to the extent that she had a brain contusion? Let me ask you this, or concussion. If the hair from that area of her head that hit the wall were submitted to you, would you expect to see those hairs appear crushed under the microscope?
Objection, Your Honor. Assume facts not in evidence.
Sustained.
May we be heard, Your Honor?
Sustained.
What kinds of force would you expect? Let me ask you in a general sense. If someone hit their head against the wall and was knocked unconscious, would you expect the hair in the area where the head hit the wall to appear crushed in your examination under the microscope?
Same objection.
Or will be.
Again, with a clarification, are you asking about the hairs that are still on the head? Those hairs, or the hairs that are stuck on the wall?
The hairs that are still on the head.
All right. Probably wouldn't see any damage to them. Crushed areas on hairs are more commonly found when they're extracted and there's damage to that area. That is, the crushing causes the breakage. Windshield impacts on hit-and-run cases are good examples of that, and also massive head injuries that may be accompanying actually a sharp instrument. You may see also some crushing as well.
All right, sir, you talked a little bit yesterday also about the terminology same versus different. If you were to take two head hairs from your head and examine them microscopically, would they match in each and every way?
I object as to approach.
Sustained. With the court
Would-
reporter, please. Ms. Clark,
Yes.
why don't you rephrase
If-
the question?
Thank you, Your Honor. If you were to take 2 hairs from your own head and examine them under the microscope, would you expect them, all of the characteristics, to appear the same to you?
No, I wouldn't. Not necessarily.
And why is that?
Well, because the hairs differ a little bit on your own head, and they're not mere images of each other. There's some variation because they're biological structures. Some may have a medulla, some may not on your same head. Some may be lighter in color, some may be darker in color. So it's important that you get a random sampling to get a good idea about the kinds of hairs that that person has on his head.
And the sampling that you received for the exemplar taken from Mr. Simpson, was that a good random sampling in your opinion?
Right, it was taken pretty much at my direction, at least discussions with Susan Brockbank, that pullings as well as combings be taken. Yes, and that was what the sample included.
And when you examined the known hairs taken from Mr. Simpson and compared them to the question hairs, for example, in the blue knit cap, were you able to see the same microscopic characteristics throughout the range of the kind of hairs Mr. Simpson has?
Objection leading and ask an answer.
Right, the range of characteristics that was exhibited by the known standard was also reflected in the range of characteristics exhibited by the question hairs. That is, by the photographs that were displayed. Some were relatively fine hairs, not heavily pigmented, not evidenced of one-sided pigmentation, whereas other hairs were coarser hairs, little fatter hairs, and they had definite one-sided pigmentation. So that's a very good consideration. It's an important consideration as a hair examiner when conclusions have to be drawn as to how the range corresponds.
And you found that in this case with respect to the defendant's hair?
I did. I found a good range.
You also discussed a little bit the photographs that you could have taken showing the field of view as you saw it through the microscope, on the comparison microscope, in which there was what we demonstrated for the jury in that chart, the circle with the line through it showing half and half, which was actually 2 hairs.
Right.
You did not take the photographs in that manner for this case, did you?
I did not. I don't recommend doing it either.
And why is that?
Well, there's problems inherent with the system. That is, when you're using 2 light sources, 2 microscopes, 2 sets of prisms, and you're looking at using film that's extremely sensitive, color film that's extremely sensitive to color variation, color temperature variation. When I say color temperatures, there's a temperature that the light bulb has, the light source, and it's incorporated into the developing process of your color film. And if there's just the slightest variation in the intensity of the light that the eye might not even see, that would show up as a difference on one side of your negative and one side of your photographic print. So you might have a little difference in background illumination. It's much easier and it's better because you show more of the hair. You get the whole field of view as opposed to just half a field, and allows you to see more of the hair. So I think there's more benefit as a layperson to see the characteristics better.
So in the other cases where you have prepared photographs to demonstrate what you have seen through the microscope in terms of your comparison of known to questioned hairs, have you always done it in this manner? Have you done it
I've
here?
always done it this way. It's just too difficult, cumbersome, and not as informative using the other method.
Concerning also the police officer elimination standards, you testified earlier to the fact that you received samples or standards taken from each of the police and lab personnel involved in the case.
Right.
And then I think you indicated on cross-examination that there were 2, sometimes 3 slides for each of them, correct?
That's right. A representative sample of hairs was prepared and mounted on slides.
Okay, now 2 slides, does that mean 2 hairs?
Oh, no. A representative sampling would mean an adequate number of hairs to compare, which could be 20 to 30 hairs, perhaps.
Now you also discussed the blue-black cotton fibers, some length on cross-examination. With respect to whether or not they could have come from the uniform of a Los Angeles police officer, Are the LAPD uniforms made of cotton?
Well, the ones that I've seen are wool.
And what does that mean to you in terms of whether or not you can exclude a uniform of an LAPD officer as being a possible source of the blue-black cotton fibers found on Ron Goldman's shirt, the Rockingham glove, and the defendant's socks?
Well, they're different fibers. I mean, there's no way that they would compare. Plus, the uniforms are blue, and the fabric that I'm referring to would look black to the naked eye.
What was it that was so unusual about this blue-black cotton fiber?
Well, it was unusual from the standpoint of the blue areas, the areas that were not dyed, at least didn't pick up the dye like the rest of the fiber. I thought that was significant as to the randomness and appearance of that lighter blue area. And it probably was a fabric causation caused by the dyeing of the fabric.
Let me ask you something else. You said that there was correct me, did you say there was like a clump or bunch of those fibers on Ron Goldman's shirt?
Right, there was a small clump. That's correct.
And I think you also testified earlier that it is common to, in the handling of bodies and the handling of evidence, for fibers to be lost.
Right, you'll lose fibers during the handling process.
So that the number of fibers that were actually found on Ron Goldman's shirt may represent fewer than were originally there before his body was handled.
That's a very reasonable statement, yes.
Given the number, or based on your examination of those fibers, the number, the appearance, etc., can you tell us what your opinion is in terms of how they came to be transferred to Ron Goldman's shirt?
Object, speculation.
Sustained.
Can you tell us whether you think that is the result of primary or secondary transfer?
Object, speculation.
Well, it's difficult to know precisely what caused fibers to transfer just by looking at them on a microscope slide. They could be transferred primarily through, as I said before, through direct contact or indirectly. Secondary transfer, in my opinion, probably would be less likely in this instance because of the numbers that we have. Direct transfer is more likely, although I can't exclude the other.
Now, sir, these blue-black cotton fibers that you examined, are they mounted on slides?
They are.
And when you completed the examinations that you conducted in this case, and the slides were prepared, the remaining hairs or fibers were replaced in their original bindles?
Right, there weren't very many left over.
And then what did you do with the items after you completed your examination of them?
Well, they bounced around a little bit at different stages.
Where was the first place they went after you completed your examination?
Well, they first went to a defense expert for analysis, and then they came back to me.
And then where did they go?
Well, then they were picked up by a representative from the district attorney's office.
And those hairs and fibers that are mounted on slides, can they be examined again if anyone desires to do so to compare to anything?
Sure, they're there to look at.
You spoke a little bit also about the hair that you found to be consistent with those of the defendant on Ron Goldman's shirt.
The one hair fragment, yes.
First of all, sir, can you tell us, when you examine hair under a microscope, can you determine based on that examination whether or not there is dirt on that hair?
Sure.
Is that a difficult or an easy task?
It's just a simple observation of what appears on the surface of the hair and the scales.
And with respect to the hair that you determined to be consistent with the defendant that was found on Ron Goldman's shirt, did you detect any dirt?
There was nothing to indicate to me that it had been laying in the dirt or out in the weather.
And you made the observation that fibers would be lost in the handling of bodies as in the natural course of things. Would that same observation apply to hairs?
Sure, there's kind of a natural loss. The more handling that takes place, the greater the loss.
And with respect to the fact that there was one hair you determined to be consistent with that of the defendant on Ron Goldman's shirt, is it possible also that there were more hairs that were lost in the course of processing the body?
Object, speculation.
Sustained.
With respect to the length of time hairs have been in a particular location at the point they're collected, you indicated, I think, earlier that there were hairs consistent with those of the defendant that you examined that were collected from the plaid cap in the Bronco.
That's right.
Do you recall testifying to finding chew marks on some of those hairs?
I do, yes.
What is the significance of that finding?
It's indicative of a hair that's been laying around in that environment for some time, long enough for bugs to get at it.
Did you find anything like that on the hairs you found to be consistent with those of the defendant in the blue knit cap?
No.
Let me ask you this, sir. The opinions that you have rendered today, are they confined to hair and fiber examinations that you conducted?
Pretty much so, yes.
Do any of those conclusions take into account that blood drops to the left of bloody size 12 shoe prints at Bundy match the DNA profile of the defendant?
I object.
Sustained.
Do your hair and fiber conclusions that you have told us about in your testimony take into account any of the DNA evidence that has been adduced in testimony?
Overruled.
No, I wasn't even aware of any DNA results when I conducted my analysis. Conclusions reached are independent of that.
Now, you indicated in your testimony thus far that the defendant's hairs exhibited certain distinguishing characteristics.
He had very distinctive hairs, in my opinion.
And did you find those characteristics, those distinguishing characteristics, in the hairs you determined to be consistent with his in the blue knit cap?
Objection, asked.
Overruled.
I did, yes.
And those distinguishing characteristics, did you also find them in the hair on Ron Goldman's shirt?
Objection, legal.
Overruled.
I did.
You also testified, this is foundational, Your Honor, you also testified that you found fibers that displayed certain distinguishing characteristics that you, I think, testified looked very unusual to you, such as the blue-black cotton fibers on Ron Goldman's shirt, the Rockingham glove, and the defendant's socks, correct?
That's right.
And such as the carpet fibers that you determined to be consistent with those fibers from the defendant's carpet in his Bronco, which were found on the knit cap and the Rockingham glove.
That was significant as well.
Based on all of the hair and fiber comparisons and examinations that you did in this case, sir, what is your opinion as to whether the hairs in the blue knit ski cap, in fact, originated from the defendant?
Well,
Objection.
Sustained.
Do the fiber associations that you've testified to in this case, sir, have any impact on the significance of the associations concerning the hair examinations you've made on this case?
Objection, that's for the jury.
Sustained.
Concerning the transfer that you talked about from Nicole to Ronald Goldman, the hair and fiber moving in that direction, can you tell us whether the murderer went back and forth between the two of them more than once based on your hair and fiber examinations?
Objection, speculation.
Sustained.
May we approach, Your Honor?
No.
I have nothing further.
Your Honor, may the notes that were referred to in the witness testimony be marked as, I believe, 1225?
Oh, we mark, no, all right, 1225.
All right. Mr. Diedrich, I thought you told us yesterday, when I questioned you about the use of the comparison microscope and the fact that you'd brought us no images of what you saw, I thought you said that a camera could have recorded what it was that you saw in the microscope. Did you not say that?
I did. It could record those images. That's correct.
And you could have brought to this courtroom the same images that you used when you wrote like or unlike in your notes without any supporting criteria. True?
I could have brought those images, yes.
And you chose not to do so, did you not?
I did.
Thank you.
And by choosing not to take the photograph in that manner, were you attempting to mislead or confuse the jury in some way?
I try to make it as simple as possible, and it's difficult to take 18 years of hair experience and fiber experience, and in the short time that I'm talking to a jury, get them to appreciate the value or the meaning or the significance of it. So I try to optimize it. I try to give you the best shot that I can, and the way I did it, I feel, is the best way to do it.
And you told Mr. Bailey that not very often do you have this many associations. What did you mean by that?
Now, I object to that.
Sustained, it's beyond the scope.
Asked to reopen.
No.
Has anything you have heard on cross or recross examination, sir, changed any of your opinions or any of the results that you have found in your examinations?
Overruled.
No, nothing that I've heard, any of the questions that I've been given influence my opinions on this case. I stand by my results.
Thank you.
Nothing further, but I ask to approach.
All right. Mr. Diedrich, thank you very much, sir. You're excused. And I think we'll take our recess at this point.
May we put something in the record?
Yes. All right, ladies and gentlemen, please remember all of my admonitions to you. Don't discuss the case amongst yourselves, form any opinions about the case. Don't allow anybody to communicate with you with regard to the case. Don't conduct any deliberations until the matter has been submitted to you. And as far as the jury is concerned, we'll stand in recess until 1 o'clock.
With regard to that time, maybe just say one word to you, Mr. Clark.
Sure. All right.